Our featured poet today is Hadrian Pollard. I did an interview with Hadrian, which was posted on Subid Creative and on SICA's Facebook pages. And he's written an epic fantasy novel called The Water Dancer, 150,000 words. It's a pretty weighty tome, which when I did my interview with him, I learned that it took him about 3 years because he's also a school teacher and studying at university as well as being a parent. So he manages to squeeze a few hours out of each day, either in the evening, and now I understand his routine is to get up in the morning and devote a few hours to his writing craft. And he's working on his second book, and he's got a third book planned. And he now calls this first volume, published volume, a draft. So he's going to share some of the poems from it, and I'll let him basically take it from there in terms of explaining what he's going to be reading and to provide us some context. So please, Hadrian, go when you're ready.
Okay. It's kind of fun. We can give presentations from our couches now, isn't it? So comfortable. Thank you everyone for coming. Hi, Mama. Good to see you, Mom. Glad you made it on. So I want to start by saying this session isn't an advertisement for this book. So I'm not asking you to go out and buy it, and I'm not encouraging you to go out and buy it. It's pretty expensive. It's like $15, and there's nothing that's as cheap as I could make it. And this is my first attempt at writing a book. This is a draft of the story that I want to tell. And the craft of writing is it's complicated, and there's so many pieces involved and so many things to learn. And I'm just kind of on that journey of learning. This is one of those first steps of that journey. It's something that gives me a lot of pleasure, being able to write like that and devote a bit of time. I mean, it's about an hour and a half when I wake up to the craft. But more so, it gives me an opportunity to sort out some things that I'm kind of grappling with in my head. It gives me an opportunity to let some things out rather than having to hold things in. And it gives me an opportunity to also problem solve. Like the act of writing, especially something this big, is solving a series of very complicated problems that need to all come together into this cohesive unit. So it's this deeply satisfying experience that you get to have every day if it's something that's built into your routine to start the day, where you feel like you've accomplished something that's quite big because these problems are so complex. And what's interesting to me is that it's incredibly complex, but it also requires you to let go and to just experience the act of writing in order to actually solve these problems. So to me, it's quite a spiritual experience. So anyway, if you decide to purchase this book, realize that you are purchasing a draft of a story. I'm piecing together an outline, and I hope that maybe in a year or two, I'll come back to it and do another draft of this story. That being said, there are some things that I am really happy about. For one, I'm happy about the ideas that I kind of wrestled with in this story, the themes. I'm really happy about the imagery that was conveyed in this story. And one of the things that really motivated me are these images that I had in my head, these kind of visual ideas. And the problem is that they're not so driven by character and plot as they should be. Like I was excited about the ideas and the imagery. And so that was a piece that I needed to learn. And then something I'm also really happy about is the world building that took place in this story. So if you're making something of this scale, you have to create a world, you have to create a geography, you have to create culture, you have to create history, you have to create language oftentimes. And you can't do all of that to a really deep degree. Unless you're J.R.R. Tolkien and you're going to spend your whole life doing it. You can only do maybe one of those things very deeply. So the thing that I tried to do deeply in this book was religion. And that's another reason why writing this one in particular was a spiritual experience for me. It was a sense of my own spirituality and the things that I understand and the things that I've experienced. And that makes me not want to abandon it as well. That's why I don't want this to be the last, the last time I approach this story. So one way that religion is expressed in this story is through epigraphs. So at the beginning of every chapter, there's a poem. So there's 46, I believe, poems in this book, and the rest of it is story. And what those epigraphs are snippets of created scripture that I made from these kind of religious texts that I put together. Then also spiritual writings from other characters, like auxiliary characters in the story. So I want to start with the epigraph for the whole book. And what this epigraph does is it lays out the kind of dual conception of God in this story. And what I wanted to capture the idea of Mother Nature. So the idea of the earth really being alive, while at the same time having a sort of an entirely spiritual manifestation of God. And I wanted those things to work together. So it's a dualistic God called the Mother and the Matron. Mother kind of hearkening back to Mother Nature. And something I was going for is descriptions of nature that were really beautiful in a world that I created that's really stark. And the character has to figure out and make sense of why that is in the story. So here's the first poem, Epigraph to the Water Dancer. Do not forget that your mother and your matron are one. The mother carries her children on her body. The beasts who eat stones roam upon the hills of her breast. Men have settled in the folds of her skin, where the tainted water wraps itself around her. All drink from her blood and rest under each watchful eye, though only the West has the gift to watch back, blinded by her brilliance. And for the matron, who built this body for herself, flows through every corner of creation. Everything seen and unseen is hers, the mother of our touch, and the matron beyond it. One. All in the Light Watch, Scrolls of Life. So that's how the book starts. Before I get into all the other poems, one more note, because this is a question I've gotten a lot, is, thanks bro. Why did I decide to name it The Water Dancer, even though there's like a best-selling, excellent book already out there by Ta-Nehisi Coates called The Water Dancer? And funny story, so the day that I finished this book, I wrote the end. I finished the book, I wrote the end, I walked into a bookstore, and I saw The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And to me, what that sign was, it's great that you wrote this story. Like, hold on to this story and now move on. Like it felt like a sign for me to move on. So I had named it The Water Dancer right when I started, 4 years ago now. And that's what it's called. So I just kept that title. And when it comes time to do a rewrite, I'll change it to something else. But I'm not expecting to outsell Ta-Nehisi Coates with this book. That's not the goal. So that's why the title stays. Okay. So a third of the way through this story, the main character is going through a personal transformation. And what she's finding is she's being swayed in multiple directions. So there's conflicts in her. It's a conflict of faith, but there's also a conflict of morality and what that means. And there's this conflict of systems of power, and she's having to grapple with that. So at this point in the story, she starts making some decisions that are not good decisions. She starts making some poor decisions. And so the next two come from a holy figure from which the character was named after. And they're very personal, and they talk about things that happen in your life, and how to deal with guilt and those kind of things. So the main character is named Mana, and the spiritual person she's named after is Manvera, the stone speaker. And the first poem goes like this. Our transgressions are pressed into the trail behind us, prints left in the soil. Only her wind can blow away your steps. Otherwise, they will follow, glued to your feet like a shadow, waiting over your shoulder to cleave your chests with your own regrets, to hold a mirror to your comeliest face, and to constrict each of your breaths until the final one escapes your lungs and you remain among your past like bones cased in mud. So the next is of the same section in the scripture. Your path is a river, frozen in time by the breath of the mother. It creeps along at an unseen pace, breaks the stone at its sides, and grows black from the ash, though, without exception, it always spills into her. So part of, you might or might not be picking this up, but part of the inspiration for the geography of this world was actually Iceland. We took a trip to Iceland. I don't know if you've been there before, but Iceland is, I felt that contrast that I kind of talked about at the beginning in Iceland, in that it's this stunningly beautiful place in certain spots. Like you'll see these enormous waterfalls and you know, endless fields of flowers, and it's just stunningly beautiful. And then you drive another, you know, 5 minutes down the road, and it's just this desolate emptiness. And it was so interesting for me to see, and I hear New Zealand is similar, but I've never driven around New Zealand. But it's really interesting to see those contrasts next to each other. And so again, a lot of the visual imagery is inspired by Iceland. Okay. So one of the struggles that the main character faces is, as I said, having to reconcile her faith, and something that she discovers when she leaves her home, because it is kind of a travel story where she has to leave and go to different places, a milieu story. The way that other people view her people shocks her and kind of sparks a lot of reevaluation for her as to what is true, what is learned, what comes from culture, you know, what's reality. And so this piece of scripture is one of those things that's kind of brought into contention for her. So here we go. We have made beasts of our enemies, as beasts are easier for men to smite. We have slaughtered beasts for food since the first words, but slaughtering men burns a hole in our hearts. The will does not always bring sleep into our beds or love into our breasts, but the will is always good. So that was kind of the first third of the story. The second third of the story is about redemption. So after these choices and after these reflections, the character has an opportunity to redeem herself. But through that, she has to face directly the harm that she's done to others, including one person that she totally threw under the bus and kind of handed over to this malevolent lord. And she becomes crippled, and the main character has to travel with her, is forced to be in proximity with this person and face what she's done. So this next poem is about crisis and how it can be disruptive and chaotic, and to be cleansing in the end. When you dig for the dredge, the water turns brown. It settles again, clear for the moments left untouched, waiting in your deepest trench to muddy the waters when you remember that you placed it there. So in this second third, this redemption arc, I also wanted to provide some contrast to the scripture. So everything we've read so far has come from this like holy book that I was kind of compiling. And the next two comes from a person. I wanted to have a different flavor of spirituality, so it's outside of the scripture. And so it's more spiritual poetry, kind of akin to like Sufi poems in a way. And so the idea is that they have kind of a lighter feeling. There's more awe and there's more grandeur in these poems. So the name of the poet is the poet Vin. Oh, and one more world building note. In this world, in this desolate world, there is no rain. Rain is a myth. And part of the thing that makes it fantasy is that all of the things that human beings need to survive, shelter, water, food, can be brought about through this magical ability. And you have to be attuned spiritually in order to do that. So a water dancer is tasked with bringing water to the people. And without water dancers, everyone thirsts. They don't have anything to drink. So rain in this story, nobody thinks rain is real. Rain is a myth. Imagining rain falling from the sky is craziness because it's such a precious resource. Okay. Imagine rain striking your head. Imagine a universe in the sky. Imagine your death. Imagine your birth. Imagine the lowest reaches of the sea. Imagine the surface of the stars. Imagine an end that never comes. Imagine a time before yourself. Imagine the world through the eyes of an ant or a creature slighter still. How small is our imagination? Okay, and here's one more from the poet Vin. Men have worn crowns of twisted wood and claimed themselves kings. They have worn ravens and claimed themselves scholars. They have worn feathers and claimed themselves priests. They have worn furs and claimed themselves boys no longer. They have worn gold and claimed themselves rich. They have worn iron and claimed themselves strong. They have worn nothing and claimed themselves pure. All the world and all you are lies in a ring. All right. So, two more. So now into the last third of the book. So in the last third, Manna finally becomes a proactive character. And something I've learned about characterization is you want a proactive character in the first third of your book. Thus, it feels kind of like a drag to get to that point, for fair warning. But anyway, at this point, she's a proactive character now. She's gone through this redemption, and she uncovers this special ability called awakening. And what awakening allows her to do is it allows her to experience other people's histories. Through this ability, which manifests as an amber light, she knows what everyone is, what a person has been through in their lives. It's like super empathy. So at the same time that I have this happening, I wanted to have epigraphs, poems by an apostle that she's been idolizing her whole life. And this apostle is called Odin the Aston. And what I wanted is for this apostle to be shown in a very human light, and someone who has introspection the way that everyone does, not someone that's just this perfect being, to kind of show, to highlight and show her spiritual journey and where she is, if that kind of makes sense. So this is the epigraph for the final chapter of the book, by Odin the Aston. I wonder what will become of me. What would my colors do on the way to the other world? Would they dance through the clouds, sail to the farthest reaches of the sea, spread over every corner of the mother's land, touch those I have loved, trace the steps I have taken, soothe the hearts of those I have caused pain? Or would the world vanish as a dream forgotten, leaving only hazy moments in its wake? And this is the final poem. So this is the poem that that comes right before the chapter where the main character is tied to a spire that is in the center of the world. It's this massive spire that can be seen from anywhere on the island of this world. And she's tied to it as a punishment. And she has to stay on that spire for 9 days. And if she lives after 9 days, she can come back down. Otherwise, but you know, people can't survive without water for 9 days. So something happens. If you decide to read, you'll find out how she survives. So this is the moment when she's on the spire, where she discovers awakening. That is a piece of it that I will give away. And so this is the poem that brings in that idea. One day, the mother will grow old. as do all creation. The bounty which is poured from your hands and souls will run dry. Both of her eyes will close, her breast will erode, her skin will flake, but the matron will continue. For even when her motherly body has failed, there is more for her to do. And so that's all I have for you. Thanks everyone for coming and listening to my poems and rambling.
Thank you very much, Hadrian.
Yes, thank you very much, Hadrian.
Pleasure.
It was marvelous. And so we now have a chance to ask Hadrian questions and to give him feedback if you want. So who would like to start? Anybody? Just raise your hand. Theo wants to start. Good for you, Theo. Can you unmute yourself, please, before you start?
Well, Hadrian, you really made me feel as if I want to go out and buy this book.
Wow.
I love your
Despite me telling you not to?
Well, don't sell yourself short, you know.
Oh, thank you.
But I love all your epigrams. I don't know whether there's a difference between an epigraph and an epigram. I learned the word as epigram, but probably the same thing. But whatever they are, it's equivalent. I learned this from a dear friend of mine who's a classical scholar and a published poet. I thought that it was the same as an aphorism. It's not. An aphorism is not a poem. An epigram or an epigraph is a poem.
Right.
And these were certainly poems, and I like them all. And it's interesting to compare the first one to the last one.
Yeah.
Number one really paints a picture of a kind of a landscape, if nothing else. But I think part of it's an inner landscape, as I remember. It's part of the world of the feelings that come to you living in this place. And the last one is very open somehow, because the matron goes on and has more to do. And it seems to me you've set yourself up for a sequel in any case, if you want to do that. But maybe that wasn't the intent. But I like a book where I get to the end and I want to go on, and I'm disappointed that the book is over. If that makes any sense at all.
Me too. Oh, yeah.
And I could comment more on specific poems, but maybe I'll wait and give other people a chance to speak here.
Thank you, Theo.
Maya, go ahead.
Hi, Hadrian. I often wonder how you bring the feeling of the Latihan into writing, and I think you really have probably nailed it. You know, you bring that into your writing superbly, and I'm sure it's in the book. It's such a gift to be able to do that, you know, and create the inner out on the page. Yeah.
And Leanna, go ahead. Unmute yourself, please. There you go.
I really enjoyed your reading, and like Theo, the book would be interesting. It's a fantasy book in a way. Is that what genre? You'd say fantasy?
Yeah. I would call it an epic fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Certain images I just really loved. I like when you were talking poet Venn was the repeating of the line, imagine your birth, imagine your death. I like the repeating, imagine, leading off into different, lines of the poem, as well as they have worn gold and claimed they were rich. They have worn, that repeating line was really effective to me, to have all these different images follow. And also I like posing the question, what would my colors do? What did her colors do when spread across the land? What would all of our colors do? What have our colors done in our lifetime? It's a really beautiful image, I thought. Yeah. And I don't think I have the line correct, but only her wind can cancel your steps. I don't think the word's wind. That was real early in one of the first.
Yeah.
I don't know the image.
I don't have it by memory, but the idea is the wind blowing away the sand. Yeah.
And just that's so fraught with so many images of what the wind can be, and all of our steps that do or don't get erased and why. So it was very thought-provoking for me, your poetry, and of course, as Maya said, the deep feelings of the spirituality of in all of it, actually. So I really, really enjoyed your sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say something that's really important for me in spiritual expression is being authentic, and it really coming from me, and it being my own words that are really arising from me. And so that was the exercise that I think was happening with this book, especially with the poems that were happening at the beginning, because I have these tools of language. I have the tools of Islam, and I have the tools of Bapak's words, and I have the tools of other poets. And all of those tools of language are wonderful, and I use them. But this exploration of the authentic words that are really my own, I feel like was important for me.
Mhm.
And the nice thing about the poems, to write a story effectively, again, I'm learning. There are lots of ways to outline and to put things together so that you have a structure that you can then be expressive within, right? And for the poems, that's not so needed, right? So the nice thing about the poems is that I could sit down and have just a blank page and a feeling that I wanted to convey in the chapter, and then the poem could arise.
Yeah.
So that was very special to me, and is probably why it's the part that I'm still happy with the book the most, So I'm glad that you felt something as well. That's
Very
yeah.
much. Thank you. It's really good.
I just wanted to commend you, Hadrian, on writing something epic. As a poet myself, I find that just daunting enough. I can't even imagine writing a whole, creating an entire world and language and religion and etc. So bravo. And I really enjoyed your poem.
It's like, of all the pointless things you could do, why pick the hardest pointless thing?
Not pointless.
No,
You're creating culture.
Yeah. The truth of it is, I've been doing this kind of thing since I was a kid, and I've kind of been doing it in secret.
Right.
So like when I was in 5th grade, I wrote a 140-page comic book that all family seen. When I was 12, I wrote half a novel. I wrote a 60-page novel.
Wow.
And then was in high school, I had a really in-depth outline of a story that I was going to put together. And what I always imagined was I would be old and retired one day, and then I would explore this, right? Like I would explore this part of myself. And I decided that I don't know if I'm going to be old one day, and I want to get started, and this is a part of who I am. So I should make room for it. And it's surprisingly easy to make room for it. I've found, it's really easy to start my day with this and then go on and do everything else that I need to do.
Well, Hadrian, you were talking about your 79-year-old dad at that moment.
Oh yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, waiting. Yeah. Right.
Yes. That's enough.
Rosanna, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you for speaking your voice now and not waiting till you're our age. Because I'm trying to write now as well, and it's much better to do it younger. So congratulations. I'm interested in the relationship between the poems and the chapters. Is it like are the poems like a foreshadowing of what's in the chapters? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My hope was that they could stand by themselves, but at the same time, what they do is they introduce, if not an idea, at least a tone that's explored in the following chapter.
Yeah, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I want to see the water dancer.
You want to see, like in, oh, you mean the film?
It's a she, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
so I want to see her on the
Oh.
cover or something.
Well, there's artwork on the back.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
This was done by a friend of mine named Fabiola.
Beautiful.
Theo, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, please.
Oh, I have a lot more I could say. Reflecting on the whole experience, I realized that the series of epigrams to me gives a flavor of this entire world.
Mm.
And it's fascinating. And I find it has particular resonance with me at this moment. I've been all over the map in things I've studied. I've had 3 careers. The third and longest was as a marriage and family therapist.
Mm.
But I find that what I go back to is history. I got my bachelor's degree in history, and I've been reading a lot in history. And sometimes history looks pretty grim, you know.
Sure.
But I get this sense, I'm reading something about Neanderthal men now. And that's fascinating. And people, let's call them. And so it's as if coming to life in me is a sense of the landscape of this whole planet over eons.
Mm.
And somehow your book conveys something like that.
Oh.
And so I find it fascinating, and I really want to delve into it. A couple of specific comments. Now I tried to number these. Were there 9 altogether? I counted 9. I don't know if they're.
I'm not sure. Yeah, 9. Yes.
Oh, okay. I got them all then. Number 5 reminded me of Babak's simile, which you may, or metaphor, I don't remember how he phrased it.
Yeah.
About the mud is settling in the water.
Yes.
And maybe you've heard what I'm talking about, but it really stayed with me. He was talking about the difference between receiving something like the Latihan, I would call it the Holy Spirit, of which Subud is not the only conduit, but it's the one that we know.
Mm-hmm.
Then the difference between that and meditation. And he said that in meditation, the water looks clear because all the mud is settled at the bottom of your bucket, but it's still there. And he says what happens with the Latihan is this big hand reaches down in and scoops up the mud and throws it out, and it makes everything chaotic for a while. But when you're done, your water's truly clear and clean. So that was powerful to me, just because that's been such an important metaphor for me.
And
I had a question about.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I'm sure I've encountered that in Babak's talks, and it just came out. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 7, I want to know, what is a ring? Everything is in a ring, you said. It's at the end, and I didn't see how that related to the early part of the epigram, but it was very evocative. But what does it mean? Can you explain any?
Sure. Yeah. So what I imagined is all of these things that I'm kind of laying out in this ordered list are things where someone is taking themselves and then elevating themselves, right? It's like 1, 2, and it's this sort of like ladder idea. And there's hubris there, right? And that I can make myself so great and so better than everyone else. And so for me, the opposite of the ladder is a ring. And the idea that you're always going to cycle back. There's always going to be humility. There's always going to be, and so in the world, the ring is an important metaphor. And the center of the world, where this big spire is built in a series of concentric circles. Everything is a ring. So it plays into that metaphor, and it's at a contrast to a ladder or a staircase is the idea.
Oh, I love that analogy. I'm gonna remember that. That's, as I agree with the aspect of hubris. You think you're climbing a ladder, and then you have to wonder,
Right.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Or are you just repeating the same mistakes in a different way?
Mm-hmm.
It struck me, number 9, that the ending is very open. Actually, I think I already said that. Number 8 raised a big question. Now, I think I may have lost the exact sense of the epigram, But by the end, it seemed to me that you were talking about wondering what will the transition from this world to the next one be like?
Yeah.
And how will we remember, if at all, the world in which we are right now, which seems so vivid and overpowering and hard to escape? But I love that phrase at the end, hazy wake.
Mm.
And that again resonated with me in some of the questions I'm having at the moment, as I'm a lot closer to you than you are, God willing, to the end of my sojourn here, you know.
Thank you for sharing that.
And then number 2 seemed like a wonderful description of karma,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly bad karma, I think, as that's what you were looking at. But that's the kind we have to worry about. Our good karma maybe tends to take care of itself. But anyway, I love all these epigrams, and I'm really excited to go read this book and immerse myself a little bit in this world. Maybe it'll make me a little bit more hopeful than this one. Sometimes I feel very gloomy about mankind's sojourn on this planet, you know, and what people go through and continue to inflict on one another.
Of course. That's another nice thing about writing as well, is, you know, having this empowering activity that you can do allows you to have the sort of handle of control, you know, when there's so many things that are really out of our control right now that we're having to witness and be, you know, inundated to. So
yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hadrian, if I could make a comment about the first epigram, where you compare, or I guess it's a metaphor, the body of the goddess, or the mother, is the earth, is the earth. And I'm surprised at how powerful I found that metaphor, how much it struck me. It really was, it sort of stopped me in my tracks, and I had to just stop and listen as you've completed the rest of the poem. So it's not often that I get that response, but boy, it sure worked for me.
Oh. Me too.
So, is there any other comments? Or Cecilia Wadi, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Hadrian. It's lovely to hear your work, and you've got notices from people in the chat.
Oh.
Just in case you don't know that. And it's not just lovely, but I find it very stimulating as a person who writes. I find it quite invasive in a happy way.
Oh.
That stimulates more expansion. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I hope I can only be happily invasive if I am invasive.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. But it helps to examine things too, you know. And the very first at the beginning with the tracks in the sand, that's something that stayed with me too, because we were talking about the same ingrown or ancestral mistakes being repeated in different forms. I'm noticing that a lot. Well, in 44 months, I'll be 80 if I make it. So.
Wow.
You will. I'm 80. You'll make it.
Thank you, Maya.
You're welcome.
Leanna, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just actually was curious how Hadrian feels about the input. Like, do you enjoy having people critique your work? And I mean, how does that feel, having people have these comments?
Yeah, I mean, it feels really good. Thank you. It's so I'm not writing so that I can get praise from people, right? Like that's not what I'm hoping for. It's a means of expression, and I think the thing that you hope is that someone can read it and it can just mean something to them, and it can be meaningful for them. And it's not that I'm trying to force any meaning on them. It's just, it's out there in case it is. So it feels really nice to know that it is. Yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you for listening and for coming out. And I look forward to a time when we can all get together in person and celebrate some in-person spiritual brotherhood and sisterhood. And,
right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that can't come soon enough for all of us here as we enter what can be a very challenging winter for our seated brothers and sisters.
Right.
And everybody on this poor planet. So that's it for today, folks. So thanks very much to Hadrian. Thank you for everybody who attended and gave us your attention. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. The next Zoom,
Much. Thank you.
the next Zoomuse will be.
Thank you again, Hadrian.
Yes, thank you to Hadrian. Take care.
God bless everyone.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Love you.